Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, everybody. So we've heard from this morning from Jennifer on through. We've heard the public policy implications of the work, some of the efforts to date. We've had the very practical walkthrough of the sea level rise projections and the resources associated with that. We've heard some of the legal implications, particularly with the latest legislation coming from the state legislature. Aaron Dede did a great job on that. And then we've had two panels, one on vulnerability and one, this most recent, from the engineering perspective, where you're seeing people, both public and private, beginning to apply some of these resources. So the compact, in and of itself, it's a cooperative activity associated with building the capacity of local governments here in South Florida. And so the compact at its core is a capacity building organization. And part of doing these kinds of workshops is one key way of doing that. But we need from you some feedback. What did you need today that you didn't get? What are the kinds of questions that remain within your own minds? What kinds of technical resources do you need? What kinds of data do you need access to? These are key top-of-mind questions for us. We've talked at you most of the day. We're keen to hear you talk back to us. So, please, what do you got? What are you thinking?
Steve.
Yes, Jennifer.
Come to the mic and please let us, Jennifer, I know it's you, but please come to the mic and say which city you're with and your name too, please.
Jennifer Hirano with Broward County Government. In my mind, I think I'd like a checklist.
Checklist.
I'd like a checklist that would drive project planners and design teams, etc., to specify how they have formally considered first and then addressed sea level rise in their project proposal or wherever stage they are, and it would get further refined through the process so that even when you were in the early formulative stage and you're kind of talking big concept about a future plan, it's addressed there. And then as the project moves forward and you're getting into the details, and then it's addressed there. And then maybe it would even be a series of checklists so that you've got something that's more generic for the early formulative phase, but then you're getting down to the nuts and bolts of, what number was used here, and then the question just, within the organization that wherever it is, the review, is this number appropriate for what, the future condition? And then also a basis of a statement of what's the sea level rise scenario that's being contemplated here and why. Is the project compatible with adjacent infrastructure? And if it's not, it wouldn't be a basis for not of consideration or advancement, but it would be, okay, so then there's this other question that somebody else is responsible for, potentially, and how are those things going to get married? So for me, and it kind of aligns with your question, but maybe it goes a little bit further, that's something that I think would be useful.
Right. And so with that, just to clarify, public and private development opportunities would be kind of shepherded by this checklist process.
Right, and then we would have an evaluation about whether or not it was sufficiently complete. So those are just, we could be looking at drainage wells and so forth. But anyway, that's my contribution.
All right. Jennifer wants a checklist. Other thoughts? Hey, Barry.
Chris Matthews on MSNBC, a 7 o'clock program called Hardball. And one of the things he always does is ask the question is, tell me something I don't know. I'm going to see if I can tell you something that I think a lot of people don't know. In terms of these sea level rise projections, it's not going to be just a smooth curve. There are all kinds of things that cause waves in the progression of sea level rise. Like, for example, the ENSO cycle, the La Nina and El Nino, has a global effect on the amount of rainfall and how much rain gets on the land and how much is in the sea. In 2011, there was enough rainfall in the Amazon and in Australia and in Pakistan and also in New England that sea levels worldwide dropped by 6 millimeters. Well, since then, it's been recovering. And now it's above the trend curve since this last El Nino. So that's one of the things that affects the extent of the flooding events, for example, we're having on Miami Beach. Another thing that is a factor is the variations in the flow of the Gulf Stream and the effect that ice melt in Greenland is having in it. But there are other things that affect it too, and I'm not sure I understand them all. But here's the one thing that I haven't heard anybody talk about, and that is the effect of the moon. You remember in September, on the 28th of September, we had a blood moon eclipse. It was 30% larger than the average moon because it was 15% closer to the Earth than average. Well, 15% would increase the gravitational force by over 30% if that affects the tides. I got in touch with one of the world's leading experts on the lunar effect on tides. This is Dr. Haidt in the University of Southampton in England. And he sent me some information that was very, very interesting. Well, without going into a lot of detail, the orbit of the moon, the orbit of the Earth around the sun, and also the relationship of the plane of the equator to those orbits varies over various time cycles, the most significant one being 18 years. And it so happens that last September, when we had these terrible flood events on Miami Beach, that all of those things lined up to a maximum. And it should be subsiding now over about the next 9 years, and then 18 years from now, we're going to see that kind of contribution again. Now, Dr. Haidt said, well, here in Miami, there isn't such a big effect. Well, he lives in England near the English Channel where tides are tremendous. We have little tides. He says, well, it's only about a 10-inch effect. Well, it's 10 inches up on the high side and 10 inches down on the peak of high tide, the king tide, is 10 inches higher than average last year than it would have been on average. And 9 years from now, it's likely to be 10 inches lower. Well, 10 inches is a lot to us. 10 inches is enough sea level rise that's equivalent to 30 to 40 years from now. Anyway, that's just something that I think we need to look into more.
Okay. All right. We'll assign that to the Sea Level Rise Advisory Committee, of which you were part. Yes.
My name is Mary Benton. I'm just a concerned citizen. I live in Miami Shores. And I attended recently a report on the Arch Creek Basin done by the Urban Land Institute. And one thing that was said then in several contexts has stayed with me. And I was wondering about it again today. And that they talked about we need a paradigm shift in thinking. And I think that is so important. And how I would love to have ideas on how you bring that about, both among the residents of Southeast Florida, but also among our elected officials.
The paradigm shift, okay. Other needs, wants? Yes, sir.
How are you? My name's Howard Tonkin. My business is called Urban Habitat. I create habitat within the urban environment to sustain endangered species, also work with flood mitigation. And I'm wondering about how there's no sort of connection between individual involvement and homeowners and what they can do and how to mitigate water, how to absorb more water. And then also, I haven't heard a lot talked about the Everglades and the metropolitan area and all the water that's coming from the west, not necessarily from the east. And then if one bald cypress tree can absorb 800 gallons per day, when do we start planting trees? Because, you know, the flooding of the stormwater is going to be more impactful before the sea level comes. So to address those problems in a proactive way by planting trees, like in Broward County, the trees are more planted. In Miami, nothing's really being done. So I'm wondering, you know, when is that conversation going to happen about the trees?
Okay.
Good afternoon, Lori Mertens-Black. I have three things that I would like to hear more about. One, when are we going to talk more about strategic retreat? Two, how can I get model ordinances that I can bring to my city commission, give me a mandate. Rather than guides. We'd like you to use these guides for planning. Give me a mandate. Sometimes government just has to mandate. It's not always popular. And then lastly, how do we better engage our elected officials so they can advocate for the programs?
Okay.
How do we find champions?
Right, okay, thanks. Yes, sir.
Teddy Lutilia from University of Miami. I was just thinking about a way for academia to collaborate in a different area than just atmospheric science. As business school, about these other topics we didn't discuss today, but I know it's on the agenda, is business opportunities with sea level rise. What's going to come after we do all those retrofits in the cities. And I think that in many business schools, they don't think too much about that. So I think it would be a good way to involve also the business community, because most of the alumni came from those business schools. So I'm talking about UM, but obviously other universities also.
Thank you.
Hi. I learned from the resilience officer in the city of New Orleans that after Katrina happened, that many people had to evacuate the city. But what I learned was very surprising is that the poor New Orleans residents did not return. In other words, once they got the energy together with their lower income capacities and they moved to another place, they did not come back. So that the people who came back to New Orleans were either upper class or middle class. And so I guess I would like to see more discussion about what happens during some major storm events which cause people to have to leave and then they don't return. So then what happens to those communities in those locations?
Okay, so displacement issues. Yeah, thank you. Other thoughts? Yeah. Dr. Gassman.
We've been having, in the city of Fort Lauderdale, we've been having conversations with the realty community. And we just passed a seawall ordinance, and they've been very interested in what the implication that has to new homeowners and people who are changing their properties over. I would like to see some sort of a 1 or 2 page guide for the realty community to understand the potential implications of sea level rise to coastal and waterway homes.
Okay. All right, thanks. Hello.
Related to what Jennifer was asking, and it's more of an ask, but I think what would be ideal is to have kind of the information like in a GIS system regarding your property and what is serving your property and how is it vulnerable. And once that information is there, it's going to be easier for the design community to incorporate it in their design, and it's going to be easier for the review panels to be able to say, okay, well, you're going to be vulnerable in 20 years. What are you going to do about it? And whether it is you're going to be designing for it or you need to contribute to a fund that is going to be improving the capacity of your pump stations or whatever it is that you're vulnerable. I think that's what's going to make the process something that is more achievable, that information is specific to your property and that the review panel can be looking at, yes, you have these vulnerabilities and this is how you can
Yeah, can I probe on that just a little bit? So there are online portals, Surging Seas, for instance, and Digital Coast, for instance, where you can go and you can look at inundation. But perhaps you're suggesting something a bit more localized that's perhaps looking at multiple issues.
Right, and not only inundation as to what's your base flood elevation, because you can plan for that, but the electricity, where are your substations and are they vulnerable? And do you have septic? What's your drainage capacity? What's your stormwater system? What's the elevation of the road? Not only the elevation of the road in front of you, but the major thoroughfares that are getting you to that property. Are they vulnerable? So I think once that information is more easily available, I think the design can sort of come with it and the review can.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts? I feel like Santa Claus.
Hey, Santa. Sam Danchuk, Broward County. Thinking about the closing remarks of this group, I wonder if there's a need to kind of either have a recommended approach or standards for which scenarios you present, based on cost estimates, because it changes the conversation if you're looking at avoided costs or if you're just looking at the maximum versus, the next highest line. I mean, I think it might make it easier if people had to consider the same types of scenarios or something like that,
Right.
recognizing every project's different. But maybe, like they're saying, you always have to include no action. Maybe you do include the worst case scenario, but then, maybe there's something else that we suggest they have to look at.
All right, thanks. Yes, sir.
Based on the last person who asked the question about the GIS, City of Fort Lauderdale has put together an application using FEMA data. My name's David Rubin. I'm with the GIS department, the City of Fort Lauderdale GIS department, which is very informative based on parcel data. It will give you information about where your property falls within the FEMA data and for insurance purposes. So it might be a first start. It's the first start of what you're asking for, but it might lead you into where you're after.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I'm Cordella Ingram, Miami-Dade County. Just an observation, while we're talking about mitigation and all these other things, is the insurance industry being brought into this discussion? Because, the insurance companies make these broad generalizations about how much you should charge or they cancel your insurance, and sometimes we talked about what people can do when they're building their houses or what they can do to remedy potential flood situation. I think that we should have a discussion or bring in someone from the insurance industry so they can better understand this, especially the people who make the decisions about whether your property, your insurance coverage is how much it's going to cost.
Yes, it is a critical issue, and the compact has been engaging both the individual members at the various county levels. Miami-Dade County government has been engaged very directly with workshops there in Miami. And then the compact the last workshop that the compact did was around insurance, finance, mortgage markets, and really kind of looking at that broader ecosystem of issues. And the business community is very concerned about that as well. So that, and the video from that workshop is on the compact website, where you can see some of the presentations and then video of many of the panel discussions as well. Yeah, but it's a critical issue and a good point.
That is very high. Hi, Chelsea Albuquerque, City of Sunrise. It's been mentioned throughout the day, but I thought it's worth underscoring the need to engage inland communities and we need better data to understand our vulnerability from the overall infrastructure. The systems were mentioned, the impacts of storm and sea level rise on the Everglades and what that means for our western communities. And one of the last panelists said something about mainstreaming resilience, right? And it really is about that.
Thank you, Chelsea. Great thought. All right, going once. Okay.
Brief comment. With a lot of the discussion about what is my risk, what does it look like, what information is available, I think a lot of the questions are all the same and lead to the need for a more detailed regional database. GIS is a great platform. There's a lot of tools being developed in a lot of different ways. One in particular that maybe this group should be aware of is called the FRIS website. It's Flood Risk Insurance or Information System. And it was developed by North Carolina based on some flooding that occurred there a few years back. There was a lot of federal dollars spent to help enhance their current system and understanding and awareness. And it began with the FEMA firm inundation mapping as BFE as a starting point. And it's very data intensive, but has grown to be a great education tool and a place that any property owner can go look at their specific house or building, understand the risk implications. There's information on there about insurance, what the benefits might be of raising the house or implementing other measures. And the important thing for Florida is, as of very recently, Florida has joined that network, and the FEMA maps have been uploaded to the system. There's an interest to expand this to a much larger scale. Obviously, the data for Florida is very limited within the site currently, but working with Fort Lauderdale and other communities, there is an opportunity to upload certain information. So FRIS, North Carolina, you can search it and find out more information.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. I wasn't aware of the phrase. All right, going twice. All right, Mr. Roberts, up to you to take us home.